Hello and welcome to the Thought Leadership Series brought to you by ETHR World and Coursera. As always, we have two eminent leaders from the industry who will share the latest trends shaping workforce learning. Next 20 minutes, we will learn how skilling is emerging as a key enabler for business transformation via tech adaptation and process innovation. With skills becoming a competitive advantage for business, today's industry needs limitless and high-impact learning, and this is only increasing. With that, let me get in my speakers for this fireside chat. Nirain Srivastava, Group Executive Director and CHRO, Motilal Oswal Financial Services, and Raghav Gupta, Managing Director, India and APAC, Coursera. Welcome, Raghav and Nirain, to this fireside chat.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Yeah, hi Nirain. Pleasure.
Hi, Raghav.
Nirain, help us understand what are some of the key trends and challenges that have impacted BFSI's learning and skilling agenda?
Yeah, I think some of the things all of us do understand that pre-COVID and post-COVID, one area for that matter, which has been impacted to a great extent in the post-COVID era is the approach organizations are taking from a learning and development perspective. One thing which has now fairly settled, I mean, a year back, maybe 1.5 years back, one debate which used to happen when we used to hear in organizations and industry at large was, whether remote learning is here to stay. And as things were, coming back to normal, there was this debate that whether we shift to, and in what proportion we shift back to physical learning. But I think the realization is, and the fact is that remote learning is here to stay, and it's a fairly established, way of learning, and therefore the delivery and the way an L&D function has to operate. I think there's a clear line of sight in terms of how do we progress from here. The other thing which is gaining a lot of traction is the bite-sized learning approach, and specifically in BFSI, one sees that the way you put your learning content, the duration of the content, the way you present that content, and the amount of time you expect a learner, right, to learn. And mind you, a lot of this is happening in a remote setup. Yeah, I think has given a lot of credence and fillip to bite-sized learning. So you have all these organizations with big amount of sales force, operating across the length and breadth of a country, like let's say in India. And these people are very, very self-sufficient with great quality of content and learning through bite-size, learning modules. So that's the second thing. And there, obviously, the other two things are skill gap assessments. Companies are realizing one thing, that skills and the realization has set in now, because you will now see businesses and the CEOs talking more and more about this, is how do I know the skills which I hired a person or I hired a workforce for continues to be my strength? Because as times are changing, the relevant skills are also changing, and therefore a task for L&D teams, HR teams at large, is to keep continuously doing skill gap assessment. And I think if you ask me what is the one most important agenda headline item for L&D function is their ability to do the skill gap assessment right. And of course, basis the skill gap assessment, how do you drive the outcomes in terms of reskilling the workforce, what kind of technology interventions you need to deploy, and so on and so forth. So to my mind, if you ask me, these are the headline items in terms of the key trends and challenges that have impacted us and that are driving the learning and skilling agenda of our industry.
Thank you, Nirain, for that. Like we know, Coursera works with multiple organizations with varied learning and skill needs. So Raghav, do help us understand some trends in global learning which has evolved in recent years.
Yeah, so I'll build on what Niren shared and add a little bit of our kind of experience as well, right? And Niren spoke about um, skills are even more important. He spoke about remote learning seems to be here to stay, and being able to understand, measure the skills gap, and doing those assessments are extremely important, right? Globally, we work with 3,000 odd companies, and the largest industry that we serve is BFSI. And this is what we are hearing from the work that we're doing, right? And just as context, before I come to learning, but just as context, we are hearing increasingly companies in the country are saying, look, clearly the customer is very digital. It was already the case pre-pandemic, but post-pandemic, whether it's a B2C customer or a B2B customer, the customer is increasingly digital, which is why many BFSI companies are saying the need for digital skills, the need for tech skills, the need for data science skills is even more important. And the second thing which companies are also finding is that they're paying heavily for digital skills, because sometimes getting the kind of talent that you need, you're competing across industry. You're not competing only within your industry, but you're competing across industries. And so a bank may say, look, I'm competing for a branch manager within banks, or another financial services companies may say, I'm competing for a sales leader within banking. But when you're competing for data analyst, when you're competing for a software engineer, you're competing with sexier startups, so to say, right? And to an extent, and this is not true for all companies, but to an extent, hybrid work is here to stay as well. And many companies have said you can come to office a certain number of days, you can work from home a certain number of days. And in that context, Pooja, one of the things that we are seeing, right, is there was a time when HR leaders would have said, look, a lot of activity in learning is what we are focused on. And that was okay, right? It would be, learning leaders would say, look, the volume of learning activity is what I'm concerned about. As long as there's a lot of learning happening, I'm okay with that. But increasingly, and I think this is all leading companies in the sector, L&D leaders, HR leaders are very focused on saying, look, I need to build business relevant skills. I don't want to build just a culture of learning for the sake of learning. I don't care whether people come and learn music and wine appreciation on my money. I'd rather build skills in banking, in digital, in technology, in data science, in leadership, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing that we have clearly seen. The good news is that we go out and ask a lot of learners what matters to you, right? And learners will increasingly tell us that, look, we want to be able to learn because, it'll help us succeed in our existing jobs. It'll help us get promoted, get increments and so on and so forth. But they don't have time, right? Everybody is super busy with just day-to-day work. So how do you create the time to be able to do this? And what we're finding is that increasingly, so I said, look, two things. Instead of just learning activity for the sake of learning activity, business relevant learning is what matters. And second, learners will tell us that, look, we want to learn, but challenge is how do we make sure this is a priority? In all of this, we found that instead of just giving a lot of content to learners and saying, here are thousands of courses that you can take, helping them develop relevant skills is where the most successful programs are being run today, right? So just continuing to build on my example of data analyst, right? If there is a business analyst at Niren's company and Niren's company says to him, look, the future is data analyst, not business analyst. What we'll come in and do is tell that business analyst, look, to become a data analyst, you need to have 6 skills. These skills are statistical programming, data management, mathematics, visualization, and so on and so forth. First thing is for you to know that to become a data analyst, you need to know 6 skills. Second thing is before you start becoming a data analyst, take an assessment. And to Niren's point, right? What is the skills gap? What is the assessment? So take an assessment so that you know what your today's standing is. And then what our platform will do using the AI, which is in the platform, is it will look at the 7,000 courses, 3,000 projects, and so on, but only show the relevant 3 courses and the relevant 2 projects to this business analyst individual. And then this business analyst individual will take these courses, the skill development will get measured, and hopefully after a few months, we will be able to say, look, you've done the skilling that is relevant to go from a business analyst to a data analyst. And then hopefully somebody on Niren's team will say, now that I have converted this person into a data analyst, I can strengthen my business intelligence team, I can strengthen my data analytics team, generate the insights which matter to business, which matter to the CEO. So long story short, but digital is important. Getting those skills externally is extremely expensive right now. The best way to do it is in-house. And the way to do it in-house is to do skills first learning as opposed to just learning for the sake of learning.
Yeah, and I see two-pronged advantage of this. For business, you're getting skills that are critical, which are in short supply. And for me as an employee, my future is getting secured. I'm preparing myself to, get ready for future jobs. Niren, given the talent challenges that BFSI faces, example, attrition, example, short supply of digital skills like data analytics, cloud computing, security, and etc. How are you building talent? What kind of capability and learning culture are you creating to help workforce nurture these kind of skills?
Yeah, look, from a talent perspective, and specifically in BFSI, a large part of BFSI is retail, right? You see examples of insurance companies, retail banks, microfinance institutions, broking and distribution companies. A large part of that is retail. And one change which I see in the last decade, if I have to summarize the change in the last decade, is the fact that 10 years back, the HR and L&D teams used to focus on solving the supply side of this equation. Now, what has happened in this country is that the mushrooming of educational avenues has meant that the supply side is sorted. You have graduates coming out in huge volume. You have engineers coming out and so on and so forth. So supply side is not the problem, but the problem is, I think Raghav also mentioned is, and I think you also said a few minutes back, is once you have taken these large volume of people on board, how you can retain them, because there's a cost, there's a huge sunk cost you pay if your attrition levels are above threshold levels. So the problem therefore, or let me put it like this, I think the trick is how, and again the L&D function comes in focus here, how an L&D function can up the game to ensure that the onboarding to initial handholding leading to the inflection point where these this large workforce which is coming into an organization is turning into a productive workforce, because this is the productivity equation in large scale financial services organizations. That's one. The second thing is that one thing which has now, I mean, the argument which has been settled is, again, I'm quoting a decadal, example. 10 years back, there used to be a debate in the boardroom over whether to build a skill or to buy a skill. I think that debate is firmly settled, because there is more than a majority, or I may dare say unanimous opinion, that the way to build an organization is to build talent. You can't always buy, even to some of the skills which Raghav mentioned, which are very, very niche, like let's say data science and digital and technology skills. Because of the demand and supply which one experienced in the aftermath of COVID, I think organizations have learned these lessons very well, that even those kind of skills, even actuarial science as a skill, fund management as a skill, has to be built rather than being bought all the time. Well, yes, you will go to the market and you will actually hire people or buy that skill, but I think the way forward is building those skills. So that is point number two, which I would want to mention. And again, the thing is which I mentioned a while back is a huge investment in on the job learning and cross training of your people. I think is key, and whoever does it better than the others, I think that organization will reap the rewards. I may be hired to do a certain job, right, and I'm paid for it, but in that process the ability of my organization to induce me into different avenues of learning, thereby making me far more fungible, right, to do other roles, hybrid roles. Maybe there's a concept of hybrid roles which is coming. You may be you are hired for a role, you continue doing that. After a point in time you are a little bored, and I tell you that, look, you continue to do this part of your job for which you are hired for, let's say, 60% of your time, 40%, 30%, I mean the percentages can vary. I'm giving you exposure to learn something and do something else. So I'm giving your role a new title called as a hybrid job. So all this, I think, whoever is able to do that, and invariably the organizations you talk about who have done better than others are the ones who are reaping the benefits in terms of productivity. And actually, this is turning out to be the biggest differentiator. And the last point I want to make here is that from a talent development perspective, I think one thing which the industry has to become very good at is the way we say that, the way a marketing sales team say that, you have to customize yourself, your product, you have to hyper personalize. Talent development and talent needs, uh, and this is not only for BFSI, for all industries, we are talking about talent, has to be hyper personalized. We cannot have the same IDP for, or one can't even say a same section of IDP for so many role holders. Every role is unique, every person is unique, and therefore the the approach to development and talent management has to be, as difficult as it sounds, has to be personalized. The better you are at this, at this ability to hyper personalize, I think the more effective you will be in terms of outcomes.
One additional point, Pooja, before we go
Mm.
forward, that might be interesting to add, right?
Yeah.
I spoke a little bit about technology, digital data skills. Niren spoke about, this massive requirement and learning in the flow of work and learning on the job. And also for a lot of BFSI companies, sales teams are large and, they are spread across the country. The other thing which we are seeing, and this is more true after the pandemic, right, is traditionally organizations have invested in leadership skilling for leaders, right, and for high potential employees. What we are increasingly finding post pandemic is leadership learning at scale for everybody is also becoming extremely important, because the definition of leadership skilling is changing as well. Leadership skilling is not just a business leader. It does not only mean managing a P&L. It does not mean, how do you think about strategic management, or how do you think about managing managers only. But what's increasingly happening is junior employees in the company, in fact everybody in the company, needs to be thinking about leading yourself, right? And mid-level employees, especially people who are becoming people managers for the first time, need to be thinking about leading teams. And then finally, of course, you have the top senior management, business leaders. And today a lot of companies, not today but in the past as well, have been spending a lot of money sending these people to top business schools and saying, okay, go to Harvard, go to INSEAD and spend a week or 2 weeks on campus. But today what we are seeing increasingly companies do, and this is not just true for BFSI but for any company, is, I as an individual need to have a certain level of interpersonal skills, which is a combination of being able to engage with you on Zoom, but also be able to meet you in person. And these are different skills, right? I need to be able to be somebody who looks at data, but to be able to tell a compelling story. So storytelling as an individual is a skill I need to have as well. And in today's environment where so much change is happening, right? If I'm a digital marketing person in a bank and chat GPT comes in and I'm like, oh, what the hell is going to happen to my job? Because, content is now going to be generated by generative AI. Then I need to have that resilience to be able to manage change as well. So long story short, but leading yourself is an important element that I think companies are investing in. And leading teams, right? How do you give the structure to a person becoming a manager for the first time and say, as a new manager, 5 skills is what we need you to build. And these are about adaptability, these are about change management, etc., etc. And then how do you put a structured training program behind that? So, not just limiting leadership training to leaders, but scaling it to pretty much everybody in the company, I think becomes an important thing as well.
Raghav, my last question to you would be, what is the most effective way of to measure the progress in learning? Some of the most effective way to assess the impact?
I think it goes back to what I started with saying. I don't think the objective of learning is to measure learning hours or to measure completions and things like that. I think the objectives or the outcomes from a learning program should be to align with what the business is trying to achieve, right? I was talking to this individual from a bank the other day, and they said, look, in our loan book, our objective is that 60% of all loan disbursement or acquisition of customers for loans should happen digitally, right? Now, do you have the skills in the company to be able to develop digital products, to be able to go to market with digital products so that the actual loan disbursement happens, the acquisition of those customers happens digitally? And today you might be at 30%, and if you build the relevant skills, then you should be able to say, okay, from 30 we went to 35, we went to 40, and so on and so forth. So I think the objective needs to be to align with business outcomes, and can learning help deliver that? And I think the second thing needs to be, which I think is a competitive advantage for companies, is to start developing a skills inventory. I have so many people in so and so skill at this level of proficiency. And then can I say, look, there are 26 skills that matter for my business success in the next 3 years. And do I know what my skills inventory is in those 26 skills across my 15,000 people? And I'm just making up numbers to illustrate the point. But can my L&D give me the analytics to develop a skills inventory so that when I partner with business, I can be a very predictable, sustainable partner where business says, look, I need to do X, and I can say it'll take me 2 months to be able to supply that need for you. I think to me, those are the most important points.
Niren, I'd like to ask you the same thing. What are your thoughts in measuring the effectiveness of learning initiatives?
I think I was having a chat with my colleague, with my chief learning officer some time back. The learning spends, and the chat was around how are our learning spends increasing, right? See, I believe that there have to be measurements around anything. When you have an input parameter, it has to have an output parameter. But on a subject like learning and development, there, I think the relevance, as I think Raghav was also pointing out, is more towards the surrogate outcomes, and not always direct outcomes. Having said that, I think organizations have matured a lot in BFSI. I'm specifically talking about in terms of tracking, monitoring, and reporting these outcomes. So I think we spoke a while back about this. Your total build versus buy ratio, I think, is a great way to say whether your L&D effectiveness is in place. Large scale retail BFSI setups clearly demarcate between when they do attrition analysis or when they do productivity analysis. They clearly have two cohorts which they are studying. One cohort is the cohort which hasn't been or couldn't be trained on, let's say, product or processes, and the second cohort is the one which was due to various factors, due to, let's say, managerial capability, also was trained well, and therefore what is the correlation to productivity. So a lot of measures are there, specifically in the context of, let's say, Motilal Oswal Financial Services. We are very, very clear with our workforce that this learning has to be outcome oriented. So we have something called as the LQ, which is the learning quotient. So what is that? I mean, just a number, but we're actually telling people that LQ is a way in which we are seeing how our people are and how much time our people are spending on learnings. Now, whether now LQ can have a threshold. One can decide 7, 8, 10, 12. The fact is that the word itself, which is the learning quotient, in conversations, this word comes, what is the average learning quotient of a function, of a team? That itself, is driving the seriousness that there is a sense of measurability around it, right? And in fact, this is also one of the things which we at Motilal Oswal Financial Services look into when we are taking some very hard-coded, decisions in terms of people's growth. Because if a leader or a person has to grow, his learning quotient and his team's learning quotient, has to be on the higher side, right, or above the threshold for us to know how serious the person is. So learning quotient, productivity metrics, built versus buy, uh, ratios, learning spend I spoke about. And of course, then there are things like it has to culminate into something like a role movement. If you're learning and your learning programs, your capability development programs are in place, they have to eventually culminate into role movements. And then, of course, the fungibility, how can you create more and more fungible roles? So in nutshell, I would say that there is a I can say a dictionary of things which you can create to measure them. But I agree with Raghav when he says that you have to be very clear in terms of the messaging that is driving. Not always numbers. Numbers are always there, but the messaging those numbers and those measurements are driving, I think, are far more important.
Thank you. That's all we have in this episode. I'd like to reiterate that industry needs new features such as personalized learning paths and stackable credentials to help the workforce achieve the skilling goals more effectively. Thank you, Raghav. Thank you, Nirain, for joining us today.